Today is June 16, 2010. I'm visiting with Dr. Gordon Emslie on the Oklahoma State University campus in Stillwater, Oklahoma. This interview is for the O State Storage Project of the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. Gordon, I know you're busy here in the next few days, and I appreciate you taking time of your schedule to be with us.
Oh, happy to do it, Jerry. Really happy to be here.
Well, I want to visit with you about the history of the graduate college and certainly the current status of the college. But first, I'd like to step back, if it's okay, and ask you to share some personal information about your early life, where you grew up, your parents and family.
Okay, well, as you'll rapidly pick up, the accent's not from Oklahoma. I was born in Scotland, a little town called Hamilton, Scotland. And born and raised there. Went to a small country school with about 60 total students. Grades 1 through 3 were all in the same room with one teacher. Moved on to high school, a place called Hamilton Academy, and then went to the University of Glasgow to do my bachelor's degree. My parents were both school teachers. My mother taught elementary school. My father taught phys ed, of all things. He was, in fact, at one point the national coach for the under 17, I believe, soccer team in Scotland. Yeah.
Wow.
So they were ecstatic, and the first word out of my mouth was ball. I really never showed any particular aptitude for athletics, unfortunately.
Any siblings, brothers, sisters?
I have one sister. It turns out it's her birthday today. I just noticed that as you read the date. And she has 2 children, so I have 2 nephews.
She's still in
She's moved house about 5 times, and is now about 1 whole mile away from the house we were raised in.
Is that right?
All her moves conducted within a mile.
Can you kind of share very briefly some of your experiences as a student? I mean, some activities you're engaged in, things you did, what it was like where you grew up?
Well, the British school system just a little bit different from the U.S. school system. In fact, when I went to college, only about 5% of the population went. And it was basically state supported. If you were one of the lucky 5%, you got to go, and the bill was basically picked up by the state. So that was a good opportunity. High school was interesting for me. It was huge compared to my step up in elementary school with 70 total students in the whole school. The other significant thing about the British education system, I suppose, is that I only majored in 3 subjects, and that was all I ever took. I took physics and math and astronomy throughout my entire college career. I didn't do any gen ed requirements, humanities. I had to catch up on those later when I got my second bachelor's degree about 30 years after my first one. I had to do all the gen ed requirements there because that was from an institution in the U.S. The happiest days of my life was an undergraduate student. I still think it was great.
What were the favorite hangouts in Glasgow?
Favorite hangouts in Glasgow used to be pubs, of course. Legal drinking age is 18, but pubs are more of a kind of a social environment. And we had at one point a 34-hour work week when I was a junior. I remember that. We had 34 hours of classes, and there really wasn't a heck of a lot of time for my socializing that year.
Well, continue on kind of the conversation. Can you summarize your higher education experiences, first as a student and as an academician there in the UK? Okay.
Well, I crossed the Atlantic in 1976. Originally, at least ostensibly, to go to summer school. Turned out that they didn't have a summer school opening, but they hired me anyway as a research assistant. And I think anecdotally, it's interesting that had the internet even been around at all in 1976, I probably wouldn't have had to go anywhere. But back then, if you wanted access to data, that data was in a filing cabinet. It turned out in Cambridge, Massachusetts, at the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, and that's where I had to be. When I got there, I discovered I pretty much had to stay because I say the data, that's what it was. And although my doctoral degree is from Glasgow, I was physically at Harvard for most of the time I spent studying it. So I graduated with my PhD in 1979, then went to the West Coast for a couple of years, went to Stanford as a research associate, and got my first faculty job in 1981 at the University of Alabama, Huntsville.
Okay. Well, kind of stepping back,
Sure.
Before you got to US, you did after you got your bachelor's in science at the University of Glasgow, then you got a master's degree.
No, I actually didn't get a master's degree. I got one of the crooks of the British educational system at that time. And it's interesting, speaking of this as a graduate dean, because a master's degree very much was the consolation prize. You went from a bachelor's to a doctoral degree, and if you had to stop out for whatever reason, they gave you a kind of master's degree, you know, for work along the way. In the U.S. system, of course, that's not true at all. A master's degree is a very valuable credential in its own right, and I spent a lot of my life actually encouraging students to get master's degrees in addition to their doctoral degrees.
So you did a lot of your work then for your doctorate at the University of Glasgow at Harvard.
At Harvard, yeah, I was physically at Harvard at the so-called Center for Astrophysics. It was Skylab data. It was data from the Skylab Space Laboratory. They had a thing called the Apollo telescope mount, which had a solar telescope on it, and looked at the sun in X-rays and ultraviolet light, and that's what my research field is to study solar flares.
As I say, solar flares, I looked on your resume, seemed to be pretty extensive research in that area.
Right. That continues. Skylab has now, of course, fallen out of the sky and has been replaced by a series of satellites. The Solar Maximum mission in 1980, most recently something called RESI, which is the Remotely High Energy Solar Spectroscopic Imager that I'm privileged to be a co-investigator on, and that funds and supports much of my current research into how solar flares happen.
So you got your undergraduate degree at University of Glasgow. What year did you graduate?
1976.
So right after then you went to the U.S. to...
Went to the U.S., but again, the PhD was still from Glasgow, even though I was physically in the United States while earning it, yeah.
So, and you indicated earlier that the reason for Harvard, that's where your research data was.
That's what the data was. My thesis advisor was visiting the U.S. and a series of stops, giving talks, I guess. And I remember getting this phone call at home in Scotland, middle of the night, because of the time zone difference, going, you know, this is John Brown. I've been, okay. I said, well, do you want to, you know, come to Harvard for 3 months this summer? And I was kind of like, Mom, can I go to Harvard for 3 months? Well, I suppose so. And originally it was a 3-month engagement, but then it rapidly became evident that for this to continue, I'd have to stay there. So I moved.
Did you, when you finished your doctorate, did you go back to Scotland or the UK, or did you stay in the US at that point?
I had to go back to defend, you know, typical graduate school rules. I had to physically be present in Glasgow to defend. So I actually went back for the whole summer to write up my dissertation, defend it, and then moved to the West Coast for my first postdoc job.
And can you summarize a little bit of your, I know you had, what, a 23-year tenure at the University of Alabama, Huntsville, but can you kind of talk a little bit about your academic career you know, before you come to Oklahoma State?
Yeah, I mean, I say most of it was at UAH, or UA Huntsville as it's now known. I went there as an assistant professor. I think it was the 5th or 6th faculty member in the physics department there, and the first solar physicist. And UAH at the time was a very young institution. They'd only been awarding degrees for about 10 years. And they were looking to grow. There's a proximity to Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, so clearly my area of research suited that kind of institution. I moved basically through the ranks, assistant professor all the way through. I became a department chair, as they call it there, in 1991, and became dean of the School of Graduate Studies there in 1998. So basically just went all the way through from assistant professor to dean, and after 23 years it was perhaps, you know, time for a change. I started being, you know, the person that people would call on to talk about the way things used to be back in the old days. And you said, well, if I don't make a move soon, you know, this will be the rest of my life. It'll be the old days. So that's why in 2004 I moved to Oklahoma State.
Well, how did, you know, what I guess was in 2004 you said you accepted the position at Oklahoma State as Associate Vice President for Research and Dean of the Graduate College. How did you find out about the position, and can you talk a little bit about the process of how you got to Oklahoma State?
I had a colleague contact me and let me know there was this position. I said the timing was about right. So I put an application in and just kind of wait. It was the only position I applied for. It was not. I was searching for a job. It just looked like a really good match for me to broaden my role as graduate dean. And Huntsville only had about 1,300 graduate students at the time. About 10 or 12 doctoral programs only in science and engineering, and I saw this as an opportunity to use what I'd learned as a graduate dean and expand that to the greater breadth of programs that Oklahoma State has to offer, with doctoral degrees and everything from agriculture to the humanities to everything in between. So I interviewed in February. It was brutally cold. My interview date, in fact, was the evening of the so-called wardrobe malfunction at the Super Bowl. I must have been one of the few people who never saw that, because I was studying for my interview the next day. I was in the Atherton Hotel here. And as I was leaving, and this is like in February, there were some students playing cricket on the library lawn right out front here, and I thought this is amazing, because one of the things that had been missing at Huntsville was this campus environment. Very young university, almost a commuter school, and the idea of having this residential population of students who, campus life was their life. It wasn't just something that they went to class, that they went to university, and that was their whole life. It was something that was very attractive to me. You yourself know, as former president of the Alumni Association, the bonds here are very, very strong. And it kind of grabbed onto me. I thought this was a good opportunity. I was fortunate enough to be offered the position, and accepted it very promptly.
Do you recall, looking back when you started, what the perceived, in your mind, the perceived strengths and weaknesses of the graduate college were at that time? I mean, what interested and appealed to you about Oklahoma State University?
Well, must I say the strengths, the breadth of the programs, the fact that the university clearly wanted to go somewhere with graduate education, that they had recognized that graduate education is a key component of the modern higher education experience. I call the master's degree the career credential. It really is important to get a master's degree in this day and age. They recognized that. The fact that they coupled it to the Associate Vice President for Research title, which was a very clear signal that they valued the research done by graduate students and saw that as an integral part of the university's research mission, was very attractive to me. Challenges at the time, well, 9/11 had just happened a few years earlier, and there was some significant issues with regard to international enrollment, which had dropped somewhat precipitously in the previous years. So in fact, I believe that was a low enrollment time at OSU. We were about 4,200 graduate students. We've now grown back, and the international enrollment has picked up, but that was a significant challenge, not just for OSU, but for all graduate schools in the country at that time. A few interesting things, as it goes back to the graduate college structure. The shared governance model for the graduate college here is, I would boldly say, unique. The administration and the faculty interact through the graduate council, and the graduate council is formed not by faculty representing colleges, but by faculty representing subject matter groups. Biological sciences, physical sciences, humanities, and that provides a very good avenue for sharing ideas with the faculty and making sure that the policies and requirements of the institution reflect the wishes of the faculty.
Stepping back for just a moment, you haven't been here except in recent years, but what do you recall about the history of the college, the graduate college?
Well, of course, there was a centennial book put out, which I read, did my homework. I actually read it some time ago. Of course, we're almost up to 100 years of graduate education here. The first post-baccalaureate, as they call it, then course was taken in 1911. So next year we'll mark 100 years of that. The first graduate dean or person with authority over graduate programs was in 1912, and that was Dr. Lewis, same as the Lewis Field that they play football on. And you read the book, it's interesting. It seems to be, like most institutions at the time, people grappling with this idea of what constituted an advanced degree. And so there's a lot of discussion, I think, unfortunately, about rules and regulations and requirements and what you can do and what you can't do. And I think that focus has changed a lot. Graduate schools now are much more focused on what a graduate degree should be and what it does for the student, and less on the dotting I's and crossing T's of what it takes to actually earn the credential. Clearly, first graduate dean, Daniel McIntosh, 1929. So that's now 80 years. And it's been remarkably stable. There's only been about 7 graduate deans since. In fact, if I did my maths right, I'm the 9th dean of the Graduate College at Oklahoma State, which is a remarkably small number. Obviously, Norm Durham stands out. Norm was dean for many, many years, and left a legacy of significant program growth. I think if you were to point to one individual, the Henry Bennett, if you like, of the Graduate College, it would be Norm Durham.
Surely you got some good Norm Durham stories, don't you? You can tell.
Oh, not too many, probably not this time. But I've met Norm several times since. He's still active. Tells a good story himself, and he did a great job for the Graduate College here. He really did. He definitely put it on the map.
Well, speaking of the evolution of the college, how have the mission and responsibilities of OSU's Graduate College and graduate colleges across America, how they changed in the later 1900s and into the the 21st century? What's been the major evolutionary changes?
Evolutionary change in terms of admissions?
Again,
the idea that
programs offering responsibility, roles, expectations.
The expectation again has changed. That most students now expect to earn a master's degree at some point in their life, and I like to encourage them all to earn it early instead of waiting till later. So there's a much greater fraction of students going on to master's programs. Not so much for doctoral programs, but certainly for master's programs. We have almost 5,000 students in the Graduate College now, out of a total population of just over 20,000. So that percentage of people who want a graduate degree is growing. I always tell students that a graduate degree is not a cookie cutter degree. We like to tailor our graduate degrees to match the students' educational and career goals. So the formal contract, as we like to call it, between the university and the student is something we call a plan of study, which is basically a list of courses and degree requirements that the student has to complete before the degree can be awarded. And although it's somewhat of an exaggeration, I like to tell people that I've never seen 2 of these that are the same. The students, to some extent, get to pick their own courses for their degrees, for their own specialization, they're going to specialize in. Growth in interdisciplinary programs, just like research occurs at the boundaries of knowledge, we're finding more and more students want a graduate degree that is based on core competencies they've earned as part of their bachelor's degree, but they want to kind of go outside the box a little bit and sort of cross into other fields. Examples being chemistry and psychology, for example. A lot of students who want to mix what their undergraduate degree with business. So they might have got a bachelor's degree in zoology, but they want to get an MBA to go with that, so they can do a history in business. They want to run a museum. So graduate credential takes you beyond the bachelor's degree in an area that you want to go in. We like to say almost 200 different ways of earning a graduate degree at Oklahoma State. That's in terms of formal degree titles and options. Beyond that, there are literally thousands of ways of earning a graduate degree. So part of the job of the Graduate College is to keep track of all this, to make sure that our degree offerings are keeping pace. The degree offerings that are perhaps not as popular as they used to be, we can drop those and make room for degree offerings that students have demand for and society has demand for. And that's an ongoing job, is just making sure that our 200 or so degree offerings keep pace with what students want.
You see one of the major changes that occurred then, and kind of summarizes some of your comments, is that it's more student specific, tailored more to students than before. Maybe more you take these 15 hours and these 15 hours and do this and that, and now it's a little bit more flexible, tailored to their personal interests and career goals.
People don't want it. I mean, my discipline is physics. I have a bachelor's in physics, and had I gotten a master's degree, it would have been a master's degree in physics. People more likely now would want a master's degree in computational physics, or in simulation and modeling, or in plasma physics, or in solid state physics. They want something that more accurately specifies the area of specialization that they've earned a degree in.
Well, Gordon, when you got here, in your opinion, what was the status of the college when you arrived? Where was it? Where did you see
I would
where it needed to go?
Sorry, I would characterize it as on the uphill. I like being on the uphill. A new provost had just started, Marlene Strait, who saw great potential for graduate education growth here. and she asked me to be, quote unquote, on her team and work with the college deans to help promote graduate education. Yes, there were challenges. I mentioned the drop in enrollment that occurred. Some of the policies were still, lurking around from 40 years ago, and I think they need to be brought up to be contemporary. And one of the biggest challenges was, like many areas, is money. To attract the best students to your graduate programs, you have to offer them a competitive financial package. A student with a bachelor's degree is employable. In order to stay and go to grad school, you need to at least make sure they don't run any further into debt. And so many of our graduate students have some form of assistantship, teaching assistantship, research assistantship. And one of the things the graduate college is concerned about is making sure that we get a good match for the assistantship positions, and that requires substantial investment in bringing those financial package levels up to competitive levels. We've done that now. When I started here, less than half of our first choice students, these were students who were a really good match to our programs. The faculty wanted these students to be here, and yet over half of them chose to go elsewhere. And a lot of times they cited the fact that there was simply a better offer. I would not want anyone to be making a career choice of graduate program on the basis of a few $100s a month at that point in life. But unfortunately, the reality is people do have to weigh that. So we have increased the packages to competitive levels, and I'm pleased to say now that over 90% of our first choice students actually do enroll here.
From less than 50%?
Less than 50 to over 90.
90%.
That's correct.
Wow.
That's correct.
Congratulations, that's great.
Well, it's great. It helps us provide matches. If the student's a good match for us, and we're a good match for them, we need to make that match work.
How were you able to do that? What were the resources for money?
Basically, it's the state money. Every year I would put in a request, and every year Joe Weaver would see it. Okay, here comes Gordon again with another request. And through the budget discussions, it was decided through Council of Deans and administrative councils and so forth that this was a thing the university had to do as a university. So incrementally, say $500,000 here, $500,000 there, pretty soon you're talking real money. We have built the program up to where we're truly competitive. As I say, 90% of our first choice students actually do enroll. Of course, we have to sustain this. This is not something we can sit back and relax. This has to be something that has to be maintained. We're constantly monitoring what financial packages are at other institutions. We've made changes to our tuition waiver program. We've made changes to the base stipends, to supplemental fellowships. We've encouraged students to seek external funding on their own, such as through National Science Foundation fellowships or whatever. And this is something that requires an office on campus that really is concerned with graduate education first and foremost, to focus all these efforts. And that in a nutshell, is what the modern day graduate college is about.
We'd like to talk about retention rates at the undergraduate level, and you talk about retaining students. What's the current retention rate for graduate students at Oklahoma State? Do you know?
It's actually very high. Most people do finish. My bigger concern rather than retention is that the students finish in a timely manner. There's a sort of national crisis going on right now in PhD completion rates. It takes sometimes more than 10 years for someone to actually wrap up a PhD. Now that is a very substantial fraction of your life, and I just don't think that's appropriate. So I've been putting a lot of effort into trying to reduce the time to graduate to a more respectable level. I would think 2 to 3 years for a master's degree and 5 to 7 for a doctoral degree. If it gets more than that, I start worrying that we're not doing things as efficiently as we could. We've done some things to try and encourage that. One of the things I'm actually quite proud of is a thing we do called the candidacy reception. Doctoral candidacy is a step that students take when they essentially finish their coursework and are now starting to work in their dissertation. They become a candidate. They fill in a form. But more importantly, I think it's important to recognize that milestone, that you are now a researcher. One last step to go. You're in the home stretch. And so a couple of years ago, we started during Research Week of having a candidacy reception where we give students a little lapel pin that says doctoral candidate on it, and they can proudly wear that. until they graduate. And it really does it's a marker in the sand that says I've gotten this far, one step to go, and I think we're going to see times to graduation improve significantly as a result. Online courses have of course increased a lot, so we have a greater access to students than we used to have. With that comes a share of challenges in making sure the students stay on track, to complete the degree program in a timely manner. But retention, most people, they've been through the bachelor's degree, they understand what it takes to finish. And so I would argue that most students that start a graduate degree do in fact finish it at some point. Maybe obviously make sure they do it as efficiently as possible while maintaining, of course, the quality in the program.
Gordon, what were some of your other priorities and early goals that you established when you first come here as dean?
I've hinted a lot about the graduate assistantship issue. That was a major drive, was to increase this acceptance rate from this 50% to the 90% that we now enjoy. Program reviews. I think it's critically important to make sure, as I said some time ago, that your programs are keeping track with what students expect in a graduate program. In some fields, this is evolving faster than you can almost keep track of. In the science and technology fields, what was a viable program 10 years ago just won't cut the mustard anymore. So we have, at LSU, like many institutions, we have a 5-year program review process. And the provost started the graduate college being directly and intimately involved in that process. So when the departments submit their 5-year reviews, some of them are quite surprised to learn that someone was actually reading them and making comments on them. In fact, just before this interview, I was wrapping up this year's comments on the 5-year program reviews. As you can imagine, with nearly 200 programs in a 5-year cycle, that's 40 a year. So it's a pretty significant endeavor, keeping track of content of programs, learning outcomes for programs, assessment of learning outcomes for programs, enrollment rates, graduation rates. All this has to be monitored and tweaked. It's a constant process, and again, having a central office to do that is a good thing. So.
You're kind of leading us into a direction I wanted to ask you about in terms of outlining the basic services and programs, responsibilities of the college. I mean, you talk about evaluating programs, 5-year review programs. I guess you evaluate new programs as well as proposed new programs.
Well, more than evaluate new programs, I think we play a critical role in helping faculty design new programs. I like to tell faculty that designing a new program is something that most faculty do maybe once in their life. As a graduate dean, I do this on a weekly basis. And so I know it's what it takes to construct a good program model. If you're adding a master's program, you have to think of all kinds of things, faculty workload issues, recruitment issues, course content, addition of new courses, graduation rate. All programs, of course, have to be approved through not only our regents, but the Oklahoma State Regents for Higher Education, and they have a format that they like to see, and they look for certain things. And I'm familiar with those, and I work very closely with the Office of the Provost and with the faculty in these programs to help them design a program that will go through the approval process as efficiently as possible. And we've added some very significant new programs in the last few years. Most recently is the Master of Science and Entrepreneurship as part of the effort in the business school. And I work very closely with the faculty in that program to create a program that would not only meet the needs of the students, but also be approved as efficiently as possible, by the regents.
I guess it's an oxymoron to say that if you have new programs, you got to have new students. Are you engaged in student recruitment?
The students drive the programs, and the programs drive the students. It's very symbiotic. Sometimes we're made aware of the need for a new program when students are saying, "Gee, I wanted to do a master's in such and such, and found you didn't have one." And again, a graduate college hears this. And if we hear it often enough, we can go to that department and say, we've had 10 students in the last year or so ask, why don't we have a master's program in such and such? And they say, well, we could do that, and we try and put one together. Programs across college boundaries, interdisciplinary programs. We try and synthesize those together.
Do you then help with the recruitment of students for these and ongoing programs?
We do. Graduate college, one major function of the graduate college is the recruitment and admissions, and I stress recruitment and admissions. We're not selling used cars here, Jerry. We're selling an education. I don't think it's appropriate to do a hard sell, right. But you still need to make students across the world, because that's our recruiting, venue. It's the whole world. You need to make them aware of what Oklahoma State has to offer, and if there's a good match, then the enrollment will follow. So not only do we process, if you like, over 9,000 applications a year to our programs, but we also try and go the extra mile in taking students, for example, who've called up and expressed some interest. We follow up. We say, well, have you applied yet here? Let's help you, learn some facts about this program, and if it's, again, a good match, we'll help you apply to it. When the student gets accepted by the graduate college, we don't leave it at that. We have an individual that is just about a full-time job, is to follow up on students who've been accepted and try and turn them into enrollments, because good students are going to be accepted more than one place. And it's okay if they go somewhere else, if that somewhere else is a better match for what they want to do. But if the best match is right here at OSU, we have to remind them of that occasionally. And a lot of students have said they appreciate that. That follow-up call saying, I see you've been accepted into the such and such program. Wanted to make sure you were still considering us, and how can we help you make this decision? So we do recruitment and admissions. We're trying to, yes, we can grow the numbers of graduate students here, but we're pushing 5,000. I'm not sure there's room for huge growth in number, but in terms of defining what type of graduate student we want here and what programs we want to have here for them, that's the ongoing challenge, is to keep that going.
What about international students? There's some things targeted towards international students, services for them?
The Land-Grant Institution, of course, we have a mission for international student involvement. Over 1,300 of our 4,700 graduate students currently are international. We're not quite at an all-time high. We're a little short of that, but I suspect next year we will in fact reach an all-time high enrollment of international students from over 100 countries are represented. Getting the word out to students in other countries is not quite as easy as getting the word out to the folks down in Texas or up in Kansas. Technology has helped a lot. Email, the ability to communicate with students across oceans has helped a lot in our ability to make the OSU product available to them. We do occasionally do recruiting trips to international countries, mostly targeted countries. I could cite Saudi Arabia, Thailand, a variety of places that we've identified that are a group of students that would be interested in our programs. Interesting, you find this for yourself, that a lot of the connections we make are because of prominent alumni who have gone on to become presidents of their countries and high-ranking academic officials in their countries, and that provides us a natural, link, a pipeline, if you will, to introduce students to Oklahoma State. We have an initiative going on in Africa right now for capacity building in East African countries that will involve their faculty pursuing higher degrees at Oklahoma State. So yeah, it's a very broad mission to try and enhance the international diversity of the graduate student population.
Another that you and I talked about one time was graduate faculty interaction. Working in terms of it. Sometimes it's student intervention, sometimes it's other ways, but can you talk a little bit about the responsibilities of graduate college and working with the graduate faculty and with students in that kind of triangle there?
Graduate college works with, it is a triangle, you said it exactly. It's an administration, faculty, student triangle, and then there are three sides to a triangle. The faculty student side is through what we call advisory committees. Each graduate student has 3 to 5 advisory committee members of the graduate faculty that are there to work with that student and help them to the degree. They're selected by the department because of the expertise they would bring to that particular student's project. As graduate faculty, these committees are basically approved by the graduate college, and so that side of the triangle between the graduate faculty and the graduate college works because the graduate faculty appointment goes through the graduate college, not through the academic college, and the appointment of those graduate faculty members to particular advisory committees is approved by the graduate college. So issues that arise in connection with student committee interaction are dealt with by the graduate college, as opposed to issues that arise in the context of a course, which are dealt with by the department and college offering that course. So we have a significant role in making sure that appropriate individuals are appointed to the graduate faculty. We work with the graduate council to achieve that, and then assigning those graduate faculty to appropriate advisory committee roles to work with the student. Now the third side of that triangle, if you've been counting, is the graduate college student side, and that's very important as well, because we're here to help students graduate. And yes, you have to be smart to get a bachelor's degree, to get a master's degree, sorry, but that's not all. You also have to comply with the university's requirements for that degree, and sometimes students need some help making sure they're aware of the steps they have to take, you know, what courses they have to enroll in, what the timelines are, the deadlines, and so on and so forth. So we work very closely with students in making sure that they're aware of what it takes to graduate. We're there, believe it or not, to help them graduate. We really are. And also that we're responsible for making sure that tuition waiver payments and stipend payments, fellowship payments, go to students, graduate students who are employed by the university. You know, the graduate college plays a central role in facilitating that interaction as well.
What you were talking about faculty earlier. What percent of, let's see, how many graduate faculty we have, and what percent is that to the total faculty population?
Most of our faculties are graduate faculty. Not all, but most, because the criterion to be a member of the graduate faculty is essentially a terminal degree in your field, whether it be an MFA or PhD or whatever, and a record of ongoing scholarship. Since most of our faculty do, in fact, have a record of ongoing scholarship, I would think 80 to 90% of our faculty are in fact members of the graduate faculty.
And how many faculty do we have?
About 1,300 or so. It's a goodly number.
Then the other question I had about that is graduate teaching assistants. How many TAs do we have?
Well, we have about 12 or 1,300 TAs. These are, of course, graduate students who help not only in teaching laboratory sections, but also assisting professors with large sections of classes and so on. And I like to see that graduate education is this linchpin between the research and the teaching, because graduate students do both. They're actually critical to the teaching mission as well.
And how many would we have at any given time in Oklahoma State, graduate assistants, teaching assistants?
About 1,200.
Oh, 1,200?
Yeah.
Okay.
We have about 1,700 assistants. There's about a couple of hundred graduate assistants. Those are folks basically just, you know, like folks in the res life area, for example. They're not teaching or doing research, but they're hired by the university. We also have about 400 graduate research assistants. These are people who are funded typically from a grant that a faculty member holds to do research. And then we have the bulk of the graduate assistants are graduate teaching assistants that work with the department to teach usually low-level undergraduate courses, sometimes others.
Anything we've missed in terms of basic responsibilities of the graduate college? Anything we haven't? You've given a pretty good summary of kind of your responsibilities.
A pretty good summary. I'm going to cheat and steal your list here. Yeah, if I was to answer your question in a kind of overarching sense, rather than getting into the specifics, I would say any issue or idea or challenge that deals with the quality of the graduate offerings at a university is the responsibility of the graduate college, and that can take, you know, various flavors, obviously, whether it's academic issues, financial issues, but if it affects our quality of our graduate programs, the graduate college is directly involved.
Some examples of that would be what?
I think quality of academic programs, number of graduate students, I just finished an interesting exercise where, at the time of this interview, there was some discussion about the Big 12 disappearing and that Oklahoma State would be moving to then the Pac-16. That, of course, didn't quite happen, but at the time, I actually did a little quick study of what our enrollment numbers and tuition rates were compared to other universities in the Pac-16, or soon to be, or postulated to be Pac-16. I'd done the same comparison for Big 12 universities. So I think it's very important, if you do align yourself with a particular group of peer universities like a Big 12 or land grants or whatever, to constantly monitor how various things stack up. Tuition rates, number of hours, credit hours required for a degree, average times to graduation, PhD completion rates, financial packages, for graduate assistants, number of graduate assistants. All these things are kind of a hallmark of the quality of the graduate programs. The National Research Council is currently wrapping up a decadal study of research doctoral programs in the country, and a focal point for all the input for the data required for that study went, of course, through all the graduate colleges of the institution involved. Such studies have typically involved sending out bubble sheets to various other people saying, what do you think of the graduate program in such and such at Oklahoma State? And they'd mark a 1 through 5. And the ranking would be based on that, reputational, if you like. That changed this year. They're now looking more seriously at things like faculty publication rates in journals, success rates of students, times to graduation, retention rates, things of this issue. And so the graduate college is a logical place to go looking for that kind of data, and we submit all that to this National Research Council, and out of that will come rankings that we hope will reflect the true quality of our programs.
Sort of my next logical question is, how's the college structured and organized to carry out all this myriad activities and responsibilities?
I do it all myself, but no. We have a dean, and I have an associate dean and an assistant dean. And the way it's structured currently, and this is not necessarily the only way it would work, but the associate dean, Mark Payton, deals largely with student issues that come up, works with the instruction council on instructional issues. The assistant dean works largely with the admissions and recruitment function, but also works very closely with a lot of the technology support that we need to keep the graduate college running, with our electronic admissions procedure, our keeping our website up to date so that accurate information is being sent out to folks and so on. So that's the kind of leadership team is 3. We also have an army of people in the admissions area. With 9,000 applications a year, you need one, and that includes both staff and student workers. With a budget in excess of about 4 or 5 million of direct dollars and about another 15 million of indirect responsibility, I have a fiscal officer to keep track of that, and just a variety of support staff, someone to help students seek external fellowship support, an individual that helps students with thesis and dissertation submission, which, by the way, is now 100% electronic at OSU. That's something that has changed since I arrived. When I arrived, it was almost exclusively paper. People were submitting these multiple copies of bound dissertations with rag bond paper with the watermark correctly oriented and so on. It was costing them a small fortune, and it was totally unnecessary. Now all of our dissertations are submitted electronically as essentially a PDF file. This is
interesting that even now in the library, that's where they're stored.
And that's how they're stored in the library. It's great for the student because it not only saves them the expense of this binding, but also you can do things with electronic documents you can't do with paper. You can include movies, you can include soundtrack clips, you can provide links throughout the document. You establish copyright on that material when we send that PDF or whatever it is file to the repository at UMI ProQuest in Michigan. So there's a variety of reasons why this is advantageous to the student, and perhaps a reflection of my leadership style. At no point did I declare that this was required. We basically subtly course students over a period of 5 years and pointing out the advantages, and slowly but surely the number of paper submissions gradually dwindled and the number of electronic submissions gradually increased to the point where 2 years ago we had 1 paper submission, and it was at that point I said, that'll do it, we'll just delete the word paper from the catalog.
You got a consensus now.
Yeah.
That's great.
In fact, that was the first thing I did for the historical record as graduate dean here in my first week. It's important to do something that you hope is non-controversial, but you got to do something. And what I did was I changed the deadline for submission of theses. I said if it's going to be paper, the deadline's still whatever the date was, but if it's electronic, we'll give you an extra week. And that's because it takes us less time to deal with an electronic submission. We can essentially do it instantaneously. The paper submission takes extra time to process. So by giving students an extra week, that's the carrot approach. More people, surprisingly enough, chose to go electronic that year.
Great psychology.
So, yeah.
Yeah, in an earlier conversation, you mentioned that the graduate college serves as the, quote, academic conscience, end quote, of the university. Can you elaborate on this?
Yeah, that's a popular term. At least the other term you'll hear is dean without portfolio, which refers to the dean. Because we mentioned earlier there are 1,300 faculty at Oklahoma State. Either none of them or all 1,300 of them report to the graduate college, depending on how you count it, because there are really no direct appointments in the graduate college. So unlike a typical academic college dean that has a huge budget and supports several hundred faculty salaries, and it's to deal with significant issues that are associated with that level of fiscal responsibility, the graduate college doesn't have that. And so we're free to focus on academics, on the quality of the programs, and let the other deans worry about how to pay for the quality of those programs. Hence this, academic conscience moniker. It's a reasonably good title, I think. We're the unit on campus that is to keep reminding folks that there's an academic mission to the university, and that, fiscal realities are there, but that there is this ongoing academic thrust that has to be maintained.
Your title includes Associate Vice President for Research, as you talked about earlier. What duties and responsibilities are included in this role as opposed to your hat as Dean?
It's a very similar hat. I work with Steve McKeever, who's the VP for Research, to make sure that as the research grows at Oklahoma State, and it has been growing significantly, that the graduate student research is a vital part of that. Research is not only, multi-million-dollar contracts carried out in $100 million buildings. It's the professor and the student working on their own in an office on their project. All of these things are part of the overall research portfolio of a comprehensive land-grant university. And so as an associate VP, and I like that term because it is an association between the graduate college and the VP for Research office, we make sure that that liaison is strong and maintained. I would like to think that a lot of the growth that has occurred in research expenditures at OSU in the last 5 or 6 years has been directly related to the growth and the quality of the graduate students we've been able to attract to our programs. Because good graduate students lead to good faculty. One of the first questions a faculty candidate will ask me is, well, okay, it's a nice university and everything looks fine, but what are the graduate students like? How many are there? And what's the kind of quality of the graduate students I get to work with in my program? So the growth of the overall research enterprise is strongly coupled to strong graduate programs, and that's my role in that title.
Kind of a virtuous cycle.
It is. It is. It's a very virtuous cycle.
Well, can you mention some other university administrators? You mentioned Steve McKeever and others, but Marlene Stray, I think you alluded to earlier, but do have been important to graduate education, at this time at Oklahoma State and in recent years?
Well, clearly, obviously, my boss says, you mentioned Marlene Stray, has been extraordinarily supportive, even with moral, verbal, and when necessary, financial. Steve McKeever has been a wonderful liaison. All the vice presidents, all of them, have bought into this, recognize that graduate education is a significant component of the way forward. The Council of Deans tremendously collegial bunch of deans who recognize that, yes, if you're going to put resources into graduate fellowships, that's resources that could otherwise have gone to other things, and are willing to agree that this is a mutually acceptable priority for the university as a whole. So a lot of things have worked largely through the cooperation of a huge number of people, not just administrators. I mean, the graduate faculty. I mentioned the graduate council earlier. Most of what the graduate college does is exercise the wishes of the graduate faculty as expressed through their elected body, the graduate council. We don't make up the rules. The graduate faculty tell us where they want to go, and we're responsible for translating that into functional language that we can utilize. But I want to stress that it's a faculty that have wanted to do this, and the graduate college is just the agent of the faculty to help the university as a whole get to where it belongs. That's what's made this job so great for the last 5 or 6 years, is recognizing that you're not just doing what you want to do, you're helping other people get to where they want to be.
And you indicated before there's a lot of shared governance and a lot of kind of a comprehensive approach to graduate education in Oklahoma State.
There is.
I think that's what I kind of hear you saying as well.
Absolutely. I mean, the administration administrates, but we're not the university. The faculty of the university, and the faculty are the ones that come up with the graduate programs and the ideas for the graduate programs. And the faculty are responsible for maintaining the quality, for defining the learning outcomes, for ensuring that the courses meet those learning outcomes. We are there to kind of remind them they have to do this, but they're the ones that are actually there making this happen. I think it's a very important realization, is that I report to the faculty.
Speaking of administration.
Speaking of administration.
President Burns Hargis.
Yes, sir.
Say this candidly and yet tactfully. Some concern is hired about his lack of academic credentials, his lack of being a career faculty person, etc. Would you care to speak to kind of his role and what he's,
sure,
how he's handled that?
I think Burns has been great, and I'm serious. Burns addressed that question head on during the interview process. He clearly stated that he was not an academic, didn't have an academic background. Everybody knew that, but yin and yang. The university has to fit together in many ways. Burns has been tremendously helpful in, getting the image of the university forward, in securing funds, private funds, to help the university move forward. I've had several discussions with him on graduate matters. He's been extraordinarily supportive. Again, both financially, in terms of making sure that resources get allocated, and in terms of valuing the overall importance of graduate education in Oklahoma State's future.
So I understand that he had pretty much was fairly hands-off in terms of leaving the academic issues to Marlene Straith and yourself and other administrators. Is that accurate statement?
Thank you. I would actually argue that Burns, apart from I saw him all the time, was largely invisible in terms of my day-to-day dealings. I report to the provost, and the graduate college continues. Now, Burns is not without good ideas. He'll come to me occasionally with good ideas, and we follow up on those. In terms of, you mentioned international recruitment early on, Burns is very aware of our need to maintain an international mission at Oklahoma State, and has pointed out certain areas, certain countries, certain regions of the world that we could do better. I'll cite 2 examples. One is Saudi Arabia, where we sent a delegation to a huge conference, Saudi Arabia, to attract sponsor students. If we're going to grow our international student numbers with limited state resources for assistantships, we have to do it through students who are going to pay their own way. And a large number of those international students will be state-sponsored students. And Burns has been very good at pointing out opportunities for us where to search for potential growth in those areas. Saudi Arabia, Turkey. I'll just say a couple of examples. There are many more where we can profitably go and get a good yield on our time investment in promoting our programs. So the role of the president is fundamentally different than the role of the graduate dean, obviously, but I think they're both important.
How did the faculty feel about the endowed scholarships program that a couple of years ago with Boone Pickett's help we launched? How was that received by the faculty?
Received very well with the faculty, obviously, and in terms of and as you talked about this virtuous cycle. Yeah, virtuous cycle. At some point, we're going to get to the point, I hope, where our graduate student packages are sufficiently competitive. We are really attracting the top tier. And those top tier students are going to ask the hard questions. They're going to ask the opposite question. Who are the faculty I get to work with? And it's very important that we be able to show those top tier students that we have top tier faculty to go with it. And this is a good place for them to come because they will have choices. And the ability to have endowed chairs and professorships that will allow us to keep and recruit and retain the highest quality faculty will, through this virtuous cycle, this symbiosis, whatever, allow us to simultaneously increase the caliber of our graduate students and so on. So yeah, I've said one's got good ideas are good, but good ideas with money are better. And so it is important to have resources to do these things.
You talked about the importance of quality faculty, in terms of directing graduate research, etc. Are there some outstanding graduate faculty that you could cite?
Oh,
at the risk of leaving somehow, but just
no. I would let me just single out the Graduate Council. In fact, the Graduate Council is a group of 18 faculty that are elected by their peers, and they meet about once a month, occasionally more often, to advise me on what the wishes of the faculty are. And they've been an extraordinarily collegial group. I can't imagine a more cordial interaction between administration and faculty. And let me cite a couple of individuals, therefore. One's Bob Hunger in entomology and plant pathology, who was the so-called vice chair of the graduate faculty when I arrived, and Lowell Kennedy in leisure studies, who's the current vice chair. Vice chair, again, is an at-large elected official, elected by the entire faculty. And they serve, although the title is vice chair, they actually chair the Graduate Council meetings. I simply sit there and offer input as required and take the recommendations of that council to the administration. So that's a very critical group of faculty that move forward. Let me stress for the other 1,300 of them that being a graduate faculty member entails all kinds of additional responsibilities, typically without any additional compensation whatsoever. Many of our faculty are 9-month appointments. But if you've got a student working through the summer on their thesis or dissertation, well, guess what? They're there helping that student through the summer. They put out enormous effort over and above to help students reach the master's and doctoral degrees that they're earning, and I think it's great that they're willing and ready to do this. I'm very proud of the fact that a huge number of faculty show up at our graduate commencement. We have a separate graduate commencement on Friday evening before the Saturday
exercise.
Well, it's not a hooting exercise anymore. It's actually got a separate commencement, and degrees are conferred at it. And we have a Regents professor do the commencement speech. And this year we had to put extra seats in. I think we had about 20 or 30 rows of faculty, because faculty want to see the students that they've invested all this time and effort in graduate with their degrees. So, yeah, we couldn't do this without the faculty.
Gordon, you mentioned we were talking about some of the outstanding faculty, but in addition to that, are there some key? If someone asks you, what are the key relationships as dean of graduate college that you must and need to maintain to be an effective overall administrator, what would be the relationships you'd point out?
Well, universities, of course, exist through a kind of consensus of opinion. It's not a very autocratic or militaristic model. So certainly my colleagues in the Council of Deans, just about any issue of significance that is about to emerge from the graduate college, I think it's important to kind of float it past the Council of Deans with the approval of the Provost, of course, and get some feedback on it to make sure that, that it's going to work. I like to say people, some of my best decisions, and then some, of course, of my worst ones, but the other category I like to keep is some of the really bad decisions that never got out of the box because I was smart enough to share it with some people first, and they said, no, that's a bad idea, Gordon, do something else. So some of the Council of Deans, department heads. Department head is one of the most important jobs on campus. And none of the great ideas that come from administration or anywhere else for that matter are going to work unless the faculty in the trenches are implementing those ideas. And it's department heads that serve as the linchpins in that regard. And we also at OSU have graduate coordinators, which are one faculty member in each program that works closely with the graduate college on issues related to those graduate programs. So we work very closely with those guys as well.
Do you, and I say this in a positive way, I mean, but do you informally cultivate relationships with the people you know? I mean, I think I hear you saying that people you're going to be interacting with are going to be important in your decision-making process. You spend time visiting, kind of offline, if you will, with these kind of
Absolutely. Folks. Yeah. When we started what's called the GAP, the Graduate Advancement Program, one of the first things I did was visit with each college dean individually, just to share with them what my ideas were and to receive from them, if you like, what their concerns were. But one of the things that came out of that, for example, was that the critical need in the doctoral programs seemed to be more acute in most colleges than the need for support of the master's programs at that time. Masters have caught up since, but that was something that it took some one-on-one interactions to fully understand and help shape the proposal that I made to the president and the E-team. And I made that proposal in full knowledge that I had 7 other college deans who had contributed to it. So I could say that, and I think that's very important to do. Graduate deans are consensus builders. You have to build, you're not going to get unanimity, but you can try and build consensus and move forward with that.
Well, I think it kind of goes to your statement, Gordon, about being, what you said, dean without portfolio.
Dean without portfolio.
You don't really rule by power, strength, or influence, but more by
influence and persuasion. Influence and persuasion, Jerry.
I like that. I like that. What can you share? Speaking of influence, can you share some accomplishments and milestones in the college during your 10 years, dean?
Well, 6 years is a reasonable amount of time. It's enough that you should have seen some such significant improvement, and I'm very proud of the fact that we now are what I would call the institution of choice for a number of students. The students who are choosing to go to grad school here and are good matches for our programs, and when we accept them, they do show up. That's the biggest. I think that will yield dividends after I'm gone, about 4 or 5 years from now, when these students graduate and start not only achieving great things in their dissertation and thesis research, but also after they go into the workforce, professional workforce, and people say, hey, where did you get your degree?
And Gordon, if I'm quoting you correctly earlier in the conversation, it was less than 50% you got here and like over 90%
That's
now.
correct.
So
it was about half of our first choice students. And there's an interesting date in the graduate school games, April 15th. For most people, that's tax day. For graduate deans, it's an even more important day because we have an agreement that every graduate school in the country has entered into, whereby if a student has an offer from University A prior to April 15th, and if after April 15th University B comes along with a better offer, University B can't make that offer without University A's concurrence. I call it free agent trading day. And so by April 15th you pretty much have to have everything sorted out as to who your students are going to be and so on. The thing that happens with that, of course, is after April 15th all the first choices have gone. So if you don't get 90% of your first choices, after April 15th, you're working, significantly down in the pool. So I think it's very important to get as many people as you can at first blush, because the opportunity to go after those folks later are significantly reduced. You have to get other universities' permission to even approach that student. So graduate college is a seasonal job. You can tell what time of year it is by looking at what's going on in the graduate college. And February and March is where we are just frantically processing applications and assistantship offers to get these people locked in prior to April 15th. And the fact that we're now getting 90% of those means we have a lot less to do after April 15th, and we're much more successful as a result. I'm very pleased with our catalog, and that may seem like a very bureaucratic thing to be pleased about, but the catalog are the statement of the institution as to what constitutes a graduate degree from this institution and what the requirements are and what you have to do to earn one, and I think that's in much better shape than it was, because we worked very closely with the faculty to refine all kinds of, not just degree requirements, but opportunities for, you know, further study. For example, we have a bridge program now where students with a 3-year bachelor's degree who used to be inadmissible can now be admitted, subject to the requirement that they do certain undergraduate courses that they would have done in their 4th year. So, you know, accessibility has been improved a little bit. We've worked with the admission requirements to, you know, improve accessibility without compromising quality. And all that gets put down in this thing called the University Catalog, and I'm quite pleased about the advances we made in that document. The faculty bylaws have been rewritten. Again, the faculty primarily did that, but at the urging of the administration, to ensure that we had the highest quality faculty on our committees, to include faculty who don't get an OSU paycheck. 5 years ago, to be a graduate faculty member, you had to be an OSU employee. That's not true anymore. We even have people from another place down south of here, Norman somewhere, who are members of our graduate faculty. It's an unpaid appointment, but it allows those individuals to serve on committees, even to advise students, and that brings a much larger breadth of expertise to our graduate program.
Richer experience.
Yeah, but it required a bureaucratic, if you like, rewrite of the requirements for graduate faculty membership, which had to be done in liaison with 13 undergraduate faculty. So, and I'm quite pleased with that. I think that's, again, one of these consensus building things that you have to, I call, socialize the idea a little bit before you go forward with it, to make sure people understand why you're doing it.
What's given you the most satisfaction out of your many and varied duties as a dean? Not just personal satisfaction,
Oh, I like coming to work every day, just the people in the office. I said about 20 people in the office. It's a kind of a busy environment to come into. Things are happening all the time. Half of my day is what I call reactive. You know, it's not pride. I don't know what I'm going to do any particular day. But I usually, things do get resolved. That gives me a lot of satisfaction. We can't say yes to everybody, but I like it when I can say no to an original request because it just isn't going to work, and still have the student or the faculty member or leave feeling that, well, that was fair, and we kind of met in the middle somewhere and we reached some kind of acceptable compromise. That's very important to me.
Where's the passion come? What keeps you landing on the landing deck? You know, every time because you got things coming at you. Like you said, you got your day planned, but it doesn't mean what you're going to be doing any given day. What it's in this crazy, job you have? What keeps you going?
Graduate education is it's the career credential, making sure students can achieve their full potential and get a credential that shows that. It only happens twice a year, but I see all these students walking across the stage at commencement, and there's all their family members in the audience cheering and yelling, and I helped. You don't always realize that. In fact, most of the students walking across the stage have no idea who I am. But deep down, you know that you helped them. We helped them get in, we helped them get through, and we helped them get out. And that's what graduate education is all about: is getting into the institution of your choice, getting through the degree with the minimum hassle and the maximum amount of work, and graduating with the degree you want.
The other side of the coin. What's giving you the most frustration?
Oh, most frustration. I'm type A. I'm very deadline driven, and so I get a little frustrated when a deadline I have to meet is compromised by a deadline that someone else has failed to meet. And that annoys me sometimes.
In academia, that happens a lot.
People sometimes fail to read important messages, and then they're getting into issues because we tried to head an issue off of the pass and it didn't work. I'll give you one example of that. The most difficult question we get to answer in the graduate college is, how many hours do I have to be enrolled in this semester? And unfortunately, sometimes a student will first go to a well-meaning individual, a staff member, a faculty member, and they'll say, well, it says here 2. And yes, in fact, that is the minimum enrollment for a graduate student, is 2 hours. However, if you happen to be a graduate assistant, that number is either 6 or 9, depending on Well, in terms of your appointment. If you're receiving federal financial aid, the answer is 4. If you're, if receiving some form of scholarship, the answer may be a different. So that's a very complicated question to answer, but you can't get an answer to it unless you ask it. And so sometimes, unfortunately, students will get caught because, well, they were told 2 hours, they signed up for 2 hours, and then something inadvertent happened down the road because they were not sufficiently enrolled. We try and get the information out, but it's a lot of information, and it's a little frustrating to have to kind of go over it again and again and again, but we have to recognize that even though it's again and again for myself, it's a new group of students every time. My associate dean, and I'll give him the full credit for this statement, it's his, has told students repeatedly, take ownership of your degree. It's your degree, it's no one else's. You're primarily responsible for making sure it gets completed. And so it is very important that students, know enough about what it takes for that degree to be awarded and what the steps along the way are to make sure that they get there. And frustratingly, sometimes that doesn't happen.
What we were talking about earlier, that in 2011,
yeah,
the university is going to be, at least I think, picked that date as the centennial of our 100-year anniversary of our graduate college, or graduate studies program. What can you tell me about some of the activities that are being proposed or planned for the centennial?
Some we've started with graduate council, because again, this is something I think the faculty should, decide and control. It's their university, and we've discussed various things we'll do. I know I have already talked to Dr. McKeever, and we will make this a highlight of Research Week during February, is to highlight graduate student research. I hope we can find some of these 8 earlier deans and bring them back, and maybe have some kind of celebration of graduate education through the ages or whatever. I will personally be back for it, I promise. I wouldn't miss it. And in some sense it's ironic that I am in fact departing at this point, because I would have loved to be around to coordinate the details of that, but I'm sure it'll be very competently managed, and looking forward to it.
What are there some emerging roles and future opportunities for the graduate college at OSU that you see? Emerging roles and opportunities.
Graduate school is a constantly emerging domain. It really is. I go to meetings every year. You're constantly seeing it. Growth of interdisciplinary programs. More and more we have to provide graduate programs that transcend traditional disciplines, and we have to find a way of defining those programs and finding faculty to teach the courses in those programs in such a way that's consistent with the university structure, which of course is very department based.
There's silos even.
Silos is fine. There's nothing wrong with silos. I think silos are fine. I have a Stonehenge model, where you have the large stone sticking in the ground, and you have the stone sticking across the top. I think it's very important in that analogy to note that the stone across the top adds to, it does not replace anything that's already there, but it provides a kind of a cross-fertilization of intellect and capability that I think is very important for graduate programs.
With the coming online of the new Interdisciplinary Research Center, is that kind of indicative of what you're talking
Absolutely.
about?
I think that will help. I think out of that will emerge new interdisciplinary graduate programs in due course, and I think graduate college should get firmly behind those and support those. There's always going to be the issue of resources, making sure that we have sufficient resources to offer the kind of quality graduate programs we need. If you look at a typical graduate class, which might have 8 or 10 students in it, or you see an advisor working with 1 student, it's clear that the tuition paid by that student is not covering the university resources that are involved. That's well known. I'm not trying to pretend that graduate students are here to make a profit for the university. They're not a financial profit, but they are there to heighten the prestige of the university, and I think it's very important that that be maintained, even although in times of economic concern, what we have now, there tends to be more of a focus on revenue generating activities. I think we have to maintain graduate activities as a way of maintaining our status.
What do you see as the challenges that's going to be facing the graduate college in the coming years? Of course, you take the flip side and say funding. And
maintaining the momentum. maintaining the momentum the last 5 years. I said I like being on the uphill. It's been a great uphill. Trouble being uphill for a certain amount of time is there's a natural tendency for the hill to crest. We've got to avoid doing that. The challenge is to keep the momentum building. To constantly say that yes, we've been successful, but let's not rest on that. Let's keep pushing forward. Define goals that are consistent with, 2-year goals, 5-year goals, and then keep pushing to get there. Keep building those consensuses, if that's a word. Keep working with the other units.
Your comments, Gordon, about financial support.
Yeah.
Can you speak generally to, I understand that in the new, the $1 billion branding success campaign in the university, that there's quite a bit of money in there for scholarships.
Yes.
I want to say close to $500 million, 500 million or something.
About 400 or something.
400 million.
Yes.
And out of that, is a large percentage of that graduate as well?
Well, it's not designated. I actually was talking to the foundation just earlier this week, and it doesn't actually specifically divide out undergraduate and graduate. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for what we call fellowships, which are not exactly scholarships. Scholarships typically pay tuition or whatever at the undergraduate level. The big advantage we have is we have these 1,200 base positions. We have teaching assistant positions. Now, at this point in time, our stipends they're competitive, but they're marginally so. And so we're attracting students, fine, but to get the really top tier students in these positions, we don't have to create more positions. We have to get a higher tier of students into those positions. That is about a $5,000 per student differential. If we could take the existing stipend and add $5,000 to it, suddenly we'd find those positions incredibly attractive to the best of the best out there. So a $5,000 fellowship, I think, would be immensely useful in heightening our graduate programs. And for the perspective of a donor, there's tremendous leveraging involved. Yes, your annual earnings that you're to endow are $5,000, but there's a $15,000 base amount that the university is already contributing. And so that student, although it's only a $5,000 philanthropic support going to that student, there's actually $20,000 of total support. And that student will be out there advertising what they're doing here. They'll go to conferences and explain their research to people. They'll publish their work, and their reputation will go with them, and with the reputation of the donor that provided the support necessary to get that kind of top tier student in place. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity for leveraging existing state resources with donor resources to improve the caliber of our graduate student population rather than the quantity of it. If you have 5,000 graduate students, I think we could live at that level for a while. To have 1,500 of those students being the absolutely best in the country would be a tremendous opportunity for us, which I think is something we should look at very carefully as we look at the branding success campaign.
Well, this is kind of a wrap question in the sense that we talked about some of these subjects, but hypothetically, if you were going to be continuing as dean here for, say, another 10 years, what goals would you set for the graduate college?
Well, I think I just mentioned them. I said the goal is to sustain the momentum. The graduate college has, one of the deans was, one name of which was nice enough when I circulated an announcement explaining I was leaving in early April. And one of the deans said, well, okay, the graduate college is on the map now. Everybody knows what the graduate college does. I think that's important, that the entity has been established. People know what the graduate college does. I think it's important to sustain that and become even more influential in promoting all aspects of graduate education, not just the research, but also the emphasis on the teaching. The fact that graduate students play a role in the undergraduate curriculum as well. So to establish the graduate student body and the graduate faculty that work with them as key elements in Oklahoma State.
How do you hope people will remember Gordon Emslie's tenure at Oklahoma State?
Probably as the guy they couldn't understand for 6 months. But as I hope as they get to know him as a guy who really was concerned about the institution rather than necessarily furthering his own career. That I have a tremendous amount of support from other people and what I've done here, and I can only hope that what I've been able to accomplish has had benefits for the institution. That, if you like, that I'd like to see as my legacy, that people reflect fondly back on that when that Scottish guy was here, whatever his name was. That'll be good.
Scottish guy that tried to speak Okie English with a Scottish accent.
Thought he knew about football.
Yeah. So as we discussed, you're going to be leaving OSU soon, and certainly you will be missed, Gordon. Can you share some of the new challenges in store for you? Where are you going?
Well, I'm going to Western Kentucky University, which is actually in south central Kentucky. I'm not sure why it's called Western Kentucky, but that's its title. I'll be provost. And they're trying to grow graduate programs, as it turns out. They have two doctoral programs, and they're trying to significantly grow the number of doctoral programs. They're trying to enhance faculty scholarship. Their enrollment has grown, like doubled in the last 10 years. So it's time for them to consider not so much a vertical growth in terms of more students, but a more horizontal growth in terms of breadth and quality of program. And I see that as one of the reasons why they thought I'd be a pretty good match to this with credentials in the graduate area. So biggest challenge will be, I've never been a college dean. So I've never had a department heads group reporting to me. So I skipped that step. Now I'll have a group of deans who are quite used to department heads reporting to them. Suddenly reporting to me. That'll be a significant challenge. I will suddenly have resources. I will be a provost with portfolio. And I've discovered already that if you have resources, people are not shy about asking for them. So that's a new skill I'm going to have to learn. I started, send resources in appropriate directions.
Maybe your A personality, maybe an A- for the while.
Yeah, but no, I think the job here has been wonderful preparation for this. It really has. I've learned how to interact with deans very well here. They've been a great group. Marlene Strait, I would keep coming back to Marlene. Has been a tremendous role model. If I can be half as good a provost as she'd been in Oklahoma State, I'll do just fine. Yeah, she's been wonderful.
And finally, looking back, Gordon, have there been some special memories for you, some highlights your time at OSU?
I'm going to say, believe it or not, homecoming. I was absolutely astonished when I saw my first homecoming here. It's just absolutely tremendous. If there's anything that defines Oklahoma State, it's the homecoming celebration. I mean, it's just tremendous sense of campus spirit and the fact that alumni do come back and feel this strong connection to the place. That and the cricket and the library lawn in February during my interviews.
And how about the women's soccer program?
I've never seen the women's soccer, but I do go to football games, and I will be back for some football games. One of the other deans borrowed a couple of tickets from me last year, so I ordered a couple of tickets, and I intend to cash in. So.
What have we missed? Anything else you'd like to share that we haven't talked about?
Yeah, we're fine. Jeez. You're going to make me cry in a minute.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Tomorrow, it's been a great ride. I'm very happy I took this job. It's been good. Hope I can help.
Thanks so much. We appreciate it.